Welcome to Policy Chat, the podcast where we delve into policy issues of interest to the Chattanooga business community. I'm Justin Grainert, Vice President of Public Policy for the Chattanooga Area Chamber of Commerce. In our first episode, we're excited to welcome Congressman Chuck Fleischmann, who represents Tennessee's 3rd District and is a member of the House Appropriations Committee. We talk about life before Congress and his journey to becoming a congressional cardinal. He takes us to the House floor the night of Kevin McCarthy's vote to become Speaker of the House, and we learn about the congressman's potential future as a published author. If you enjoy this podcast, please like, follow, and subscribe. Without further ado, here's our conversation with Congressman Fleischmann. So you were elected to the House of Representatives in 2010. Let's talk about the time before Congress.
Congress.
So how did you get to Chattanooga? What was your career focus before being a congressman, and kind of what drew you to run?
Well, thank you. I was privileged, Justin, to practice law with my own law firm, which we opened up June the 1st, 1987. Was a proud member of this great Chamber of Commerce, which was infinitely helpful in launching at that time because I was basically a sole practitioner. But practiced law here for 24 years, was very, very fortunate. It was a time where the smaller firm was almost out of step. The firms were getting larger and stronger and bigger. So I found a niche right here in Chattanooga. Fortunately, early in my legal career, I was able to win and prevail in some very interesting and difficult cases. And after that, my practice grew. My wife and I were fortunate enough to raise 3 wonderful sons here. And then after 24 years of practice, I was ready for a change at then age 48, and went home one day and I asked my wife, I didn't tell my wife, I asked my wife, I said, there's going to be an open congressional seat. I'm about ready to give up the practice of law. It's been great to us. I would like to run for Congress. Got some interesting looks and some interesting comments, but that's how we ended up here.
Awesome. That's great. So talk about how Congress has changed since your freshman year in 2011. You were sworn in January of 2011, and it feels like a lifetime ago. I worked on a congressional race in that cycle as well for Congressman Bouchon, who you know,
yes,
and it seems like that was light years ago, and I feel like the tone and tenor has maybe changed a little bit from the outside. How do you see Congress has changed since your freshman year to now?
Sadly, it has become even more polarized. It was polarized then. When I went to Congress in 2011, I was sworn in, I would speak with some of the more senior members at that time, some of whom were actually in their 90s, mentoring to me. And they spoke about the good old days where Republicans and Democrats could disagree, but could coalesce more around the center of the political spectrum. I think what we've seen is Congress becoming more partisan, more polarized. The left has gone further left, the right has gone further right, not everybody. The administrations have gained in power, and I think that's something that, with the growth of the power of the executive branch to the detriment of the legislative branch, and I mean the House and the Senate, that dynamic has been very pronounced, and we've done some things to try to curb that. And then, of course, I think the role of the judiciary, the high court, the Supreme Court, has become very, very focused and vocal in terms of its very high-profile cases. So, in a nutshell, I would say more partisan, more polarized. However, as an appropriator and representing a district, the great 3rd District of Tennessee, which has Chattanooga, Oak Ridge, 10 wonderful counties, I think keeping us on track to still being able to get our work done.
What ways do you think we can sort of help break that sort of super partisanship on both sides? Is there sort of a path forward where we can kind of, in the long term, get back to a more sort of sane center as it was once called?
Yes, I think, and I was asked this question on national TV just earlier today, I think the American people, our electorate, needs to step up and be heard. What we hear from are the extremes. I hear from the extreme left and the extreme right almost daily, screaming, ranting, raving, exercising their great free speech rights. But I think the American electorate right now in our great constitutional republic, and we are a constitutional republic, we are not a democracy, in our constitutional republic need to stand up, be heard, and basically talk to elected leaders about taking positions that are reasonable, that are tenable. I routinely see things that sadly, even as a legislator, shock me. These are positions that I think are detrimental to our republic, detrimental to our business community. I'm a business person. I love the free enterprise system. I'm a beneficiary of the free enterprise system, in a society that allowed me to have tremendous upward mobility. First person in my family to get to go to college, then to go to law school, then to start a business in a city that I was not native to. My wife grew up here, I did not. Tremendous opportunity. If you go out and work hard and play by the rules and work to help people, great things can happen. I want us to revisit that as a nation and I think get back to that.
So you're serving as the chair of the Energy and Water Development Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee. You are what is called a cardinal, which is a pretty big deal. And for those of us that have been around the congressional hallways, talk about your path in Congress, both on the Appropriations Committee and then finally being named a cardinal.
Well, thank you. I am privileged to be Tennessee's only member of the Appropriations Committee in our 9-member delegation. When you're an appropriator in Congress, by virtue of being an appropriator, you are, whether you're a Republican like me or a Democrat, in the minority. The vast majority of members are what we would call an authorizer. And authorizers are great people. They basically make the laws. We decide whether or not to fund or not to fund. We've got the purse strings in Congress. Early in my congressional tenure, Senator Alexander came to me, and he was very, very laudatory of me, very praiseworthy of me, at a time when very few people were being praiseworthy of me. This was in my first term, and we know the political history. It was very arduous. We survived that and actually, I think, prospered. But at that point in time, he said, "You're very intelligent, you're very reasonable. Have you ever thought about being an appropriator?" And I said, "No, Senator, I have not." He said, "I want you to look at doing that." He persuaded me. He said, "How many times do administration officials return your phone call?" And that time it was during the Obama administration, and I summarily told him, never, okay? And that was the truth.
Yeah.
He said, "Go on the Appropriations Committee, and I promise you that administration officials, be they Republican or Democratic, will return your phone calls that day." Truer words were never spoken. After my first term, I went to then Speaker Boehner and basically said, "I would like to be on the Appropriations Committee." Boehner's a friend, but he did not like appropriators. And he said, "Why?" I can remember sitting there with a cigarette in his mouth. "Why, Fleischmann? Why do you want to be an appropriator?" Actually, one of his best friends, who's now passed, La Tourette from Ohio, was an appropriator and a dear friend of his. He kept his word. Boehner always kept his word. He said, "You'll get the next slot on appropriations." We did it. And then Howard Baker, our late senator, picked up the phone and called Hal Rogers, who's still serving, Dean of the House, and said, "Fleischmann's going to be an appropriator, but we need to get him on the Energy and Water Subcommittee of Appropriations." That happened. I now chair that subcommittee. That's where I have my cardinal slot, but I also serve on Labor, Education, Health, and Human Services. Very, very strong civil portfolio, second only to Defense and Appropriations, and State and Foreign Operations. Very interesting situation happened. The Speaker called me after I got the chairmanship. Was very instrumental in that, Kevin McCarthy was, and I got on these 2 other appropriation subcommittees. He said, "Chuck, I need you to be an authorizer again. I want you to go back on science." So, yes, Mr. Speaker. So now I play offense and defense. Oh, wow. I am both an appropriator and now an authorizer. So I have to say nice things about my authorization.
That's pretty rare, though, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's not something that happens very often.
It is not. That is literally like playing offense and defense in football.
Absolutely. I
can play on both sides of the ball. Literally, the chairman of the Science Committee asked me to come back. I fund most of that portfolio, whether it's our great national labs, the Department of Energy, or the like. So they wanted a senior appropriator on the Science Committee, and I agreed to do it.
So this term kind of got off to a little bit of a rocky start. If you remember, we were all, I think that might be the most C-SPAN I've watched since I left working for Congressman Bouchon. As the Republican conference really couldn't settle on a speaker, Talk about the dynamics at play during that first week of Congress and how the conference finally rallied behind Kevin McCarthy to become Speaker.
Excellent. You've got to go back to the election, and this is a story that needs to get out. We gained a 5-seat majority. Believe me, it's better to be a 5-seat majority in the House than a 5-seat minority. I've always said the House is a body of numbers, the Senate is a body of rules. Truer words could never be spoken. After the election, we met as a conference in very early December, outside the presence of the media, elected internally our leadership team, addressed our rules as a conference, and the like. That's when I found out that I was going to be the Cardinal, the Chair of Energy and Water Appropriations, and the like. You could kind of tell in the room then, Justin, that the ultimate vote on the floor for Speaker might be a little bit contentious. I've always been a person of my word. I've always been a straight shooter, infinitely honest with my constituents. It's the best way to be. I went to Kevin McCarthy early and I said, Kevin, I'm with you. I will support you. You've got my vote for Speaker. That is not going to change. What can I do to help? As the process unfolded, and you alluded very well to the C-SPAN coverage of that, I had people from all over the country saying, Fleischmann, I see you all over the floor. And literally I was. Tell you what I was doing. I was actually going out and getting votes for Kevin. We had some of our brethren, and I respect this very much, who decided that either they would be for somebody else, small minority, or wanted to wait and see. And through that process, I was able to work with some members and get them there. And I'll never forget that fateful moment on the House floor where there was literally a motion to adjourn up. Now, bear this in mind. At this point in time, the clerk of the House, not a Republican nor a Democrat, was presiding over the House. Yeah. So we had a neutral in the chair presiding, and she did a very good job understanding that this was going through a tremendous amount of votes. And basically, some of the members who had been holdouts came across to be either yes votes or, more importantly, present votes to get us to our majority. And I think the thing that I was most proud of was I went up to McCarthy and I said, sir, give us some time. And this was after that last vote, and I said, there was a motion to adjourn up, and I said, time is not your friend. We do not need to reconvene on Monday. Let's give us some time to see what we can do. And I went back and I spoke with one member, and I'll tell you, it was Matt Getz, and I just spoke with him. And I said, look, Matt, I've got nothing to offer you. I respect the fact where you are. Let's talk about this. And I know a lot of calls did come into him and the like. And really, on his own volition, he came from a no to a present. And McCarthy was elected Speaker of the House. And we had our acceptance speeches at 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, it was such an arduous time and a tiring time that I remember actually staying there because we had votes on Monday. Yeah. So you wake up later on Saturday morning, you might as well just stay. So I called Brendan and said, look, I'm just going to stay here for the weekend. And then Monday morning, we had a speaker. Of course, we already had the majority leader and my good friend Steve Scalise. We had elected him earlier. And then, of course, Tom Emmer as our whip leader.
That was a wild, I remember watching it clearly because, again, it was funny watching Twitter of all my political friends. We were all tweeting back and forth about this Friday evening that wouldn't end. And I think it was about 2 a.m. But when they made the call to adjourn, and then you see Matt Gaetz get with Kevin in the well, the speaker, to be in the well, and then they start whipping against the vote to adjourn, was wild for those of us that have followed the process, because that never happens.
Yes.
And then it was everybody's trying to change their votes. It was pandemonium on the floor for a hot minute, and then they got the vote, which was fun to kind of finally see it all come to an end. I'm all for good floor chaos to a point, and then it's okay, guys, we got to get this thing going. So I'm glad that turned out the way that it did, and thank you for your work on that.
Thank you. And it speaks well for the process, really, that in our great constitutional republic, whether you're a Republican or Democrat or independent, the American people tuned in and watched that. And I think what's great about our wonderful nation is that we are accountable. We're responsible to the citizens. They could actually watch that unfold as it did, even though there was some hyper-partisanship and some issues. When it played out, I had a lot of people come to me later and say, wow, I'm glad I live in a country that I can actually watch that unfold as opposed to being told later in some canned version of what happened. And it was good. And I will say this, I think Kevin McCarthy came out of that vote stronger than he went in. So that was a good thing. I think that was evident this week when we had our vote on the debt ceiling and the like. It's a tough position to be in right now as Speaker.
So how have things evolved in the House under Kevin McCarthy as Speaker? Obviously, with the new majority, Speaker Pelosi had the gavel before that for several terms. How have things evolved from your perspective in how the House functions, about sort of the priorities that are being discussed and talked about, obviously majority rules in the House. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'll answer that two ways. Some of my Democratic colleagues have come to me and said, my gosh, the House is operating as an institution in a much more efficient fashion. That is clear. We no longer have single votes open 3 or 4 hours while we're waiting for proxies and the like. We no longer have proxy voting, and we have votes. If we say a vote's going to be 15 minutes or 5 minutes or 2 minutes, all of the above, they are. So if you're a Republican or Democrat and you're not there for that vote, you're going to miss it. And I don't miss votes. You can look at my voting record. I've got probably the highest percentage in the delegation and one of the highest in Congress. Why? I figure if I'm not there and I don't vote, 760,000 East Tennesseans don't get a say. So if it's naming a bridge or voting on a budget, I'm going to be there and be responsible to vote. So it's much more efficient. Now, the good news, when you're in the majority, in my party, the Republicans are in the majority by 5, we control all of the committees. So we've got the committee chairs. You talked about the fact, Justin, earlier that I am the chairman of the Energy and Water Subcommittee on Appropriations. If we were not in the majority, I would be the ranking member. I've served as ranking member before, so it's no fun, literally, when you're in the majority in the House. So it's more efficient. We're getting things done. I'm in the process right now, as are my colleagues, of writing appropriation bills. That's critically important, not only for the 3rd District, but for the country. So we're working very hard. We are making progress. We are getting things passed. The Senate is a problem logistically, and I'm not just talking about in a partisan sense. They've had some illnesses. They've had some other problems that have literally let some of their business grind to a halt. I don't think that's good for the country, but in the House, we're getting our work done.
Let's shift a little bit to the current state of policy. We've heard a lot about the unrest in the banking industry, both in the U.S. and globally. Where are we, and what do you see happening down the road with both the banking industry and the economy, both sort of from a 30,000-foot view and then even from a congressional view?
Certainly. I have always maintained that we need a strong, vibrant, protected banking system in the United States. I support bankers. I think having credit available to businesses large and small is very important. Having a place where depositors such as myself can place their life savings and know that it is secure, and it is very important. I think what comes to mind is a few months ago we had a major bank fail. And at that point in time, if you look back and see some of the decisions that they made as a bank, fewer depositors with amounts well over the FDIC insured. Now all those depositors were made whole. That was a decision that was made, probably a good decision, because the last thing you want to do is cause an unnecessary panic. There was no need for a panic. That was one bad bank that made bad decisions. Recently, we've had another bank, I believe First Republic, have major problems. The good thing is that JP Morgan Chase bought them out. So what we need to do is make sure that we cherish our banking system, make sure that regulators are doing their job but not coming up with rules that do insane things. When we have people punished for having better credit scores than not, that makes absolutely no sense. Credit is a risk. If I go into a bank and want to borrow money, they're going to look at my credit history, whether or not I can collateralize that bank, whether it makes good business sense to make that loan. That's the way that we ought to approach banking. That's the way our good community banks are doing in Tennessee. And that's why our big banks need to do that as well. The Federal Reserve is in a very interesting position right now. We talk about banks. They have precipitously increased interest rates. I think they had to do that because of the inflation. They did not have many tools available to it. That was the largest tool. So we've seen rates over the past year and a half go up originally 3/4 points and a half point. Now they've been down to 1/4 points. We've got to watch the inflation monster, and it is a monster. There's a lot of reasons that we have inflation, and I'm very, very critical of the Biden administration for the way that it spent money, trillions of dollars that we can't even spend right now, but if you will, I'll use the term loosely, they appropriated money to do that. But we need a strong, sound banking system. I think we do in this country. Fortunately, in our great state, we have a lot of very good banking institutions that are doing a good job. You ask about the economy. I think we're in a mild recession right now. I don't know if that creeps into a moderate recession. What do I mean by that? We're seeing anemic growth in the economy. Under the previous administration, we saw the economy grow, unemployment down. We saw a lot of the indicators going in the right direction. Sadly, we've got these great trade deficits. We're in a competition with China. We're not in a competition with Russia. Russia is weak. Their military has just really underperformed woefully in Ukraine, and their only true ally, the Chinese, have been stunned by this. Yet they do have resources. They've got oil, so they do play. But our main competitor is China, and the other large economy that is looming is India. India just surpassed China in terms of population. Last week, they are the largest population in the world. They are a democracy, but they are playing very, very strong in economic markets. And I want to see America and the American economy, if you will, prepare and tool up and be in a position to compete globally and be at the top again.
Another potential issue to the economy, you alluded to it a little bit ago. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said on Monday that we're hitting sort of the January 1 deadline for the debt ceiling.
June 1st.
June 1st, I'm sorry. Where are the negotiations at with the White House and the Senate currently? What has the House done? Let's start there, and then where do we see kind of the conversation going from the vote last week to sort of June 1? And raising the debt ceiling?
We are close to $32 trillion in debt. Putting that in perspective, when I went to Congress in 2011, we were $15 trillion in debt. Years ago, we had an opportunity that failed when we had an opportunity to have a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. It had passed the House. There was a tie vote in the Senate. And there was a president in the White House who probably would have signed it. Al Gore, our senator then, cast a no vote to break the tie, and we lost the opportunity as a country to have what we have in Tennessee. Our Tennessee Constitution has a balanced budget requirement in it. That's why our state basically has zero debt. There's a lot of nice things that government can do, but if you can't afford it, you don't do it. Unfortunately, in Washington, D.C., deficit spending is the way they go. They borrow, borrow, borrow. So we're now $32 trillion in debt. The House, I think, took a step in the right direction. It wasn't a perfect bill, but I did vote for it. What did it basically do? It basically set us on a path towards fiscal responsibility on the discretionary spending side, but it protected veterans, it protected defense, and it protected homeland. What that does, and this is where we are, we passed that bill, we sent it to the Senate, we don't know what they're going to do, and we really don't know what the White House is going to do. Again, President Biden, Joe Biden, taking the wrong approach. He says he will not negotiate. That's an untenable position. When you're the President of the United States, the American people look to the person in that position to be reasonable, to be active, and to do what's in the best interest of the country. Joe Biden says he's not going to negotiate. When you have a Republican House, a split Senate with a small Democratic majority, but not enough to get to 60 votes, and a Democrat in the White House, you've got split government. You've got to be able to sit down and negotiate. He's been unwilling to do that. Having said that, let me be clear. We need to raise the debt ceiling. We will raise the debt ceiling. But I do think we need to do what the House did last week and put in at least some starts to fiscal responsibility. We did that. That vote passed, largely along partisan lines. Now we need to sit down and get something done. I think we will. We've got to. If we do not, financial markets will respond adversely, and I think the American people will respond adversely. They expect us to get it done. We've got to raise the debt ceiling so our listeners and viewers know this is money, unfortunately, that is already spent. So it's not future dollars. This is money that's already spent. So if you don't raise the debt ceiling, it creates something that's called a default. If you default when you're a debtor, it is not good. That means foreclosure for an individual. That means repossession for an individual. For a country, it means utter financial havoc.
But of course, deadlines happen to work in Washington, it seems
Yes.
like. So, let's get as close to the line as we can get before we get a deal. You've been traveling the district. What issues are you hearing as you're kind of going around the 10 counties that you represent on this latest tour of the district, or as the year has gone on? Kind of what else is percolating out there right now that you're hearing?
Justin, I was dealt a very good hand when I got the 3rd District of Tennessee, 10 wonderful, vibrant East Tennessee counties. I have to talk about my constituents. When I was a lawyer, people said, Chuck, why did you win just about every case? Well, I chose my clients well. I chose my fact pattern well. When I ran for Congress, I knew I represented good people. I ended up representing great people. City of Chattanooga, a Renaissance city. The rest of the country and the rest of the world look at our great city and say, wow. Hamilton County, my largest county, 350,000, by far my largest of 760,000 constituents. Good, rock solid county. I was fortunate to get all of Bradley County back right above us. Obviously, it's Cleveland plus a lot more. Tremendous, tremendous county. That's 110,000 people. So it's a county in which the population is largely balanced towards the southern part of the district. Couple of exceptions. The city of Oak Ridge is in Anderson and Roane County. That's about 25% of my constituency. A large DOE reservation, $7.4 billion worth of annual federal investment. Probably the thing I'm most proud of is the Chattanooga Oak Ridge partnership that I instituted years ago, and we announced at a Chattanooga Chamber event. Could not be going better. EPB is working with the lab. Chattanooga businesses are working with the lab. Chattanooga businesses are getting to get contracts on the uranium processing facility and other things we're doing there. So that partnership has been very, very good. My other counties are doing well. McMinn County and Monroe, where I was yesterday, the people are glad to see me. They're concerned, though. They're concerned about the economy. They're concerned about inflation. They're concerned about the direction that the country is going in. They like their congressman, which is good. They're very vocal about that. It's the age-old adage. I think most people complain about Congress, but they like their individual member. But there's great concern out there. But I will say this. Tennesseans are great Americans, and Tennesseans are optimists. And there's abounding optimism out there all across the 3rd District, whether it's rural Morgan County in the north or large Hamilton County in the south.
So obviously the Chattanooga Chamber, we represent the business community here in Chattanooga. Can you talk a little bit about the ways that we as a business community, not just the Chamber, but the business community as a whole, can be helpful to you in your role representing us in Washington?
Well, we are fortunate. Chattanooga Area Chamber of Commerce has been ranked before #1 in the world. I mean, that is astounding. So we start with good people in your role, and I don't take that lightly. I've been in some of my counties where the Chamber of Commerce literally is one person. These are counties without much in the way of resources, and I applaud that for them for trying. I'll approach that two ways. When I was a business person, when I had my law firm, I can remember going and joining the Chattanooga Area Chamber of Commerce and showing up at an Eggs and Issues breakfast. At that point in time, as a small business owner, I could actually speak and network with other businesses. And you would talk with people and meet with people and start picking up business, helping them. So there has been a long-standing tradition with this chamber of helping small, mid-sized, and large businesses. I want to help everybody, and I want everybody to grow that pie. That's why I oppose taxation so much, because I want people to keep more of their resources and invest them in their community, whether that's with jobs, whether that's with growth, whether that's with philanthropy. I think we've got that in Chattanooga and in Tennessee. What does the Chattanooga Chamber do for me right now? It keeps me well grounded. I know full well through the Chamber and its membership, when we're coming up on a key vote like we are now, where the vast majority of the business community is in Chattanooga. That's very important to me. I want to make sure that when I'm casting that vote, that on anything, I'm casting the most responsible vote I can, given all the facts I've got, and given where my constituency is. I'm a representative, and sometimes when I sit and talk to some of the folks on the other side of the aisle from this district, and I'll be specific, when I talk to people who are more progressive, they get very upset with my center-right voting record, okay? That is very, very pro-business, and that is very socially conservative. But I remind them, I said, look, I represent the 3rd District of Tennessee. If you look at where this district is, I am spot on in terms of that. That doesn't mean I don't listen to other people, but this is not the 3rd District of Massachusetts. Those folks vote very, very differently, and they represent their constituents or constituency. So having said that, the Chamber is always a resource for me. Where's the business community? What do they want me to do? The last thing I want to do is come back as a representative having voted in a way that the vast majority of my business community does not want. Because if I support the Chamber, if I support the business community, in my view, prosperity will grow in the 3rd District of Tennessee, and it has.
So as we wrap up,
Yes.
I have 2 final questions for you. You're an author.
Thank you. Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about sort of your writing process and if and when we'll ever see these novels that you've written get published.
Well, I'm a fan of fiction. I don't believe in tell-all books and things like that. And I'm envious of my friends who write nonfiction because they have got to be 100% accurate in their portrayal of their work. If it's a historical fact, you want it to be a fact, they can't get it wrong. And I've had talks with them. What I like about fiction is the license of fiction. My novels that I've written are political and historical fiction. So what I can do is take a historical fact or a historical fact pattern or a person and basically have them the license and the candidness with my readers that there's going to be a fiction element to this. I can take a flawed character and either make them more flawed or less flawed and change endings and the like. But I've written 3 manuscripts. 2 are ready to go to publication. We are working very closely with our good friends in House Ethics to make sure that absolutely everything is above board and precise. I look forward to getting these books out, and hopefully somebody will find something of value in those books.
That's fantastic. I look forward to getting my copies
Yes.
of the book when they're ready to go. What is a book that you'd recommend to our audience that you've read recently?
Read recently, goodness gracious.
And congressional legislation does not count.
Well, my books, because I reread my books all the time and I
Sure.
reread it, which I have a penchant for, and you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to an old standard. I spoke with my friends at Princeton recently because I do a lot on fission and fusion. In Princeton, they have a wonderful fusion program. They've had that for years. And Princeton was the school for F. Scott Fitzgerald, a great American author. Actually, I prefer his works to Hemingway. I do like Hemingway, but I go back to The Great Gatsby. I think it's the great American novel, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to write. I wanted to write or take a shot at the great American novel.
Sure.
The critics will decide whether or not that endeavor was fruitful. They're going to get a novel or two or three. But I think Great Gatsby.
All right.
I think it speaks for a lot of different things that are applicable today. Somebody who basically really worked hard and got to a spot and had all of the foibles and frailties and upsides and downsides of that. So I think that's a great American novel.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for your time today. It was nice to have you join us for this first episode. And we thank you for all of your service to Chattanooga, to our country. And if obviously there's anything we can ever do, you know how to get a hold of us. So,
well, thank you. And
absolutely.
to those watching, if you're a business person, strong recommendation, join the Chamber of Commerce. I mean, the networking, the resources, and just being part of the team that moves our great community forward is so good. Everybody's got something to offer, and I really think we're doing it right in Chattanooga.
Awesome. Thank you again for joining us.